SFB Addict here. I'm going to do a quick series of videos on how to make a vassal module. I'm going to call it an idiot's guide to making a vassal module. I'm the idiot. The idea is to hopefully cover some stuff that Joel Toppin of GMT Games hasn't covered in his videos. And, well, let's get right to it. The first thing is that when you go to File, New Module, this is what you get as a blank module. Now, most people are probably going to pick a game that's similar to what they want to do, open it up, and then just start modifying, adding, and deleting things. But if you start from blank, this is what you get. Now, the first 4 items here on this list are not available in this right-click drop-down for selecting things. So if you accidentally delete these and then save it, there's no way to get them back other than starting a new module. And in addition to that, the very first item has a quick start plain text. That's actually a plain text help file entry. It is meant to display an intro.html file, which is really sort of like a quick jump into the overall vassal module and how to use things, not specifically your module. And there is an about module here, which does exist in the drop-down, but you can only have the one. In other words, only one will show up in this entry here when your game is actually loaded. There'll be one here for about vassal, and then yours, which is going to be about the module. So once you change that, let's see, I'll use my Starfleet Battles Cadet module. So once you save that, sometimes you have to restart things in order to get them to show up, so let me do that. Let me just pause it here. Okay, I've reloaded that. That's the one thing about Vassal that's sometimes a little annoying, is that some changes won't show up until you've saved it, exited, and relaunched it. But now we have an About module entry. And if I click it, it gives me my splash screen. Now, in addition to that, you've got add HTML help files and add plain text help file. Now, these basically open a window that displays text. The HTML file one will give you the ability to show images. Now, there is a drawback to HTML files in that you must strip the header from the HTML document before you save it, because if the header is there, when you open it in Vassal, it will display a blank window. Because of that, you have an additional option of using this line here for starting page. And if you put in a web URL, this will actually launch your web browser and take you to an external web page. So if you have a website, you can redirect them to that website and have all your module documentation on your website. Because of the need to strip the header, and you're likely going to forget doing that time and time again, it gets annoying. So I actually recommend the external website if you have one, but you don't need one. You can use a regular HTML document, just got to be sure you strip that header. And if you don't need images, you can always just use a plain text help file. And basically when you click on it, up in the help section, it just opens up a window and you get the text that you can read. Okay, so that's the help section. The definition of player sides basically lets you to define what teams or sides are in the module. So you can do Team UK or Team France, or Team 1, Team 2, anything you want. It just creates a list of the teams. So your teams plus observer are what show up as your player sides. And this retire button lets you choose between being one side, the other, or reverting to being just simply an observer. And that's what your tooltip here says. Allow another player to take your side. So if you click the retire button, you are giving up your side. So when you start a game, you're given the option to be an observer or pick a side. The next item down is your global options. Now, global options is not the same as the two other global key command. As you can see, the windows are different. Or the startup global key command. So these two global windows are not the same as global options. And as you can see, there is no other item in here other than these two for global options. Now, what this does is it allows you to designate who can unmask pieces. So, never, always, or user preference settings. Center on opponent's moves, same thing, always, never, user preference. Auto report, always, never, user preference. Now, if you go into your file and preferences for the overall Vassal engine, you'll see that those options aren't here yet. It's actually the game module where you get your preferences. And this is it. Now, these options here have to actually be set to user preferences in order for a checkbox to show up in the preferences. So the user can decide to allow unmasking, centering on the opponent's moves, or auto report. Now, in some games, when you mask a piece, it basically just takes the counter and puts a secondary image over top of it, and that's all you see is the new image. You don't see what the original image was. And in certain games, this may hide important information. So depending on what you're going to do with masking will determine whether or not you always want to allow non-owners to unmask, you never want them to unmask, or whether or not you want to put it in the user preferences. Now, the center on opponent's moves, if you have a very large map, if your opponent is using the top left and you're using the bottom right, and you have this set to always center on opponent's move, if he moves a piece, it's going to move your map and refocus it on his piece, which can get annoying. So that one I recommend you put it for being user preference setting. Unless, of course, you're designing it for play by email, in which case you should probably always use it as always. And the auto report moves, you should probably always leave it as always, unless you're going to be designing something like using your number pad in order to be able to move pieces, and you're going to be defining your own reports for each keystroke, in which case you would end up getting two sets of reports. But the auto report moves is the only report you're going to get when you use your mouse to grab a piece and move it. So I recommend leaving it either always or for user preference. And then, of course, your player ID format, you've got two options, player name or player side. And then you've got some options here to replace these graphic icons, which are the default ones that are loaded with each module. So you've got your undo, your step through next, and your server status window toggle. So if you want to use a different graphic than the ones that are here as default, you can change them. And then, of course, you can designate what the hotkey on your keyboard is going to be for the server controls and for the step forward hotkey. But interestingly, it doesn't give you the ability to define a hotkey for undo. so that's help, definition, and global. Now the next one is your game piece image definition. Now this is a way of making counters using the vassal module without actually using images. And GMT Games, Joel Toppin, did do a video specifically on this, and I recommend you go take a look at that. But I'll quickly just open this up and throw in a quick example of what I mean by it. So you can throw in a symbol, and the symbol set is NATO units only for some reason. But you can throw in your symbol, and you can change its width, and you can change its location. On that little white square represents the counter. Now, the thing to bring to your attention here is the Y offset. You would think that X would be positive to the right and negative to the left, and Y would be positive upwards and negative downwards. But in Vassal, Y is always negative in the upwards direction, which can get confusing. So it's something you simply have to remember. So if I change this -10, Y offset back to 0, it goes to its original position. If I make it a +10, it goes down. And if I make it straight to a -10, it'll jump all the way to the top. And then you can rotate your image. And then you can do things like a text box. And you could change the width of it. And you could change its location. And do various other things. And you can specify an individual image or fixed text for the layout, so you can put a number or text. And change that offset to 15. So you can do that sort of thing for making your counters. So you got an option here for a symbol, label, text, box, image, a shape. And then you can move it up, down. So, border style, plain, fancy, 3D, none. Counter width, counter height. So if I want to make that 154 or 64. So you can make counters using this feature. Okay, so that's the first 4 things that do not exist on the right click. So that will be the end of video 1. Let's start video number 2.